Transcorp Hotels PLC, as the hospitality subsidiary of Transcorp Group, has announced its financial performance for the third quarter of this year, showing a strong year-on-year growth on all indices. The leading hospitality brand sustained strong growth, recording 31.76% growth in revenue to 29.9 billion naira from 22.7 billion naira the previous year. Profit also grew by 62% to 5.5 billion naira from 3.4 billion naira the year 2021. The result reflects the company's commitment to deliver exceptional value to its stakeholders and sustain its growth momentum. Commenting on the results, Dupe Olushola, who's the managing director and CEO of Transcorp Hotels, said, and I quote, "This consistent financial upswing reinforces our dedication to excellence in the resilience in the face of economic challenges. We have remained nimble, adapting quickly to meet the dynamic preferences of our guests," quote and unquote. So the chairman of UBA Group, Elumelu, has provided clear explanations of how his economic theory of Africapitalism can promote inclusive wealth throughout the continent. Elumelu was speaking at the 7th edition of the Future Investment Initiative alongside Richard Attayas, the chairman of the FII Institute. Elumelu also stated that there is need for massive investment in electricity to overcome the challenges of development in the economy.
The Africapitalism stems from my experience. I'm African, born in Africa, bred in Africa, and I've done business in Africa. And I've come to see firsthand the level of poverty on the continent. I've come to see the energy, the youth, the aspirations of our young ones. It's a continent of about 1.4 billion people, and the average age is about 20 years old. So you can imagine the type of continent we have. Yet, joblessness remains an issue. Lack of access to economic opportunities, lack of access to health care. And so all of this, and see in my own life story, how I got to where I am today. In Africa, I realized that the private sector, we do have a role to play in developing the continent. And not just one person, and not just government alone. We don't have, or should not have, any entitlement mentality that some people will come to develop the continent for us. So we decided to involve the young Africans, get the private sector in Africa to work together to prioritize our young ones, get government to create an enabling environment, and hence the philosophy of Africa, and that in the 21st century, first, no one but us can develop Africa. 2, we need all hands on deck in developing Africa. 3, we need to prioritize the young one to whom the future of Africa belongs to. And most importantly, our private sector people, a realization that it's not about the money we have in our bank accounts, but how we're able to deploy the capital we have in creating economic opportunity and prosperity for our young ones. And so Africapitalism is a call on the private sector, invest long-term in critical sectors of the African economy that have the potential for transforming and catalyzing economic empowerment and prosperity on the continent, so that at the end of the day, we all go far and go together, and no one left behind. And embedded in it is philosophy of inclusive growth, philosophy of empowering young men, as well as our women who had for a long time been left behind. And realizing that our government must play their own role in catalyzing the opportunities and the enablement that will enable private sector take off, and working also with the philanthropic organization in Africa and outside of Africa to develop the continent.
But how can we combine profitability? Because at the end of the day, in capitalism, it's about profit, to reinvest. But how can you combine profitability with all these challenges of creating inclusive model, gender equality, climate resilience, now climate change, especially in Africa, where we are in full transformation and full growth, I would say. So how do you combine, what is the business model to be able to achieve this mission?
So I think one of the reasons Africapitalism has been accepted and being practiced by quite a number of people is because we don't just preach, we don't just theorize, we practice. So in our group, we have Transcorp, which is the largest electricity generating company in Nigeria today. Transcorp has combined energy generating capacity of 2,000 megawatts. So for an ordinary eye, that is an economic investment that yields profit for the investors. Fine, and we support that. But more importantly, we all know that access to electricity is the single most critical factor that we need to fix if we must develop Africa. For our young ones to go to school, they must have access to electricity. For hospitals to function very well, we must have access to electricity. For businesses to grow, develop, we must have access to electricity. So that is Africapitalism in action. We're investing, you make profit, but at the same time, simultaneously, not one waiting for the other, you also invest in critical sectors, not just trading, critical sectors that help to move the needles. We need massive investment in electricity on the continent. So an investment in electricity, not just for profitability, it is for profitability because we need sustainability, but more importantly, it helps to fix the challenges that we have, the challenges that hold us from taking off as a continent. So that is the philosophy of Africapitalism.
And how Africa integration and regional integration is important for this process? Because, as you said, we need electricity everywhere. So a single country is quite a challenge to sometimes invest on power. So which role could play regional integration? Because we are in the region here, the GCC, as we say, and you know very well this part of the world. How can we collaborate? What should we do to have a successful regional integration?
We need to break down the barriers in Africa. We need to wire our infrastructure in a way that encourages intra-Africa trade. We need to produce what our people need. We need to create a bigger market for every one of us. And that is why we support this new movement, the AFCTA, that brings Africa, creates the largest in terms of geography, a market in the world. But more importantly, we need to empower the young generation of Africans to be able to create. Because if you trade and you don't produce what your neighbor needs, your neighbor will go outside to look for who can produce it. So we need to make sure that in Africa we're able to produce what we need. And again, that speaks again to the philosophy of Africapitalism. We must realize that no one owes us our development. We as Africans must work hard to develop our continent. We must show that in the 21st century we have Africans who are not just agents, commission agents, but who are investors on their continent. If we don't show interest or confidence in our continent, who else will show interest in our continent? So that is what we preach in Africapitalism. But equally important is a realization that what we seek today as demographic dividend, that is the population. Our population were huge in terms of number, and more importantly, the demography is very, very favorable. Young people, that is huge market for the world. That is huge labor for the world. But we need to catalyze this and shape it in a way that is progressive, in a way that is positive, and not in a way that people become disenchanted with life and now begin to embrace migration or extremism. And that, again, is another call I always make to African leaders, friends of Africa. And I'm happy I'm in the Middle East, I'm in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. It's an opportunity to take the message to the world. Africa is ready for investments. Africa has a lot of opportunities. We do have challenges, but in spite of the challenges, the opportunities are huge, and people should take advantage of the opportunity. We need a Marshall Plan for Africa. We need to mobilize huge capital, long-term capital into the continent to enable us leapfrog and enable us fix infrastructure that we need to develop. Japan, Germany, Korea, even China have benefited from massive global capital infusion. Africa needs this, and I'll be failing if I don't use this opportunity to draw the attention of the world to the opportunity we have on the continent. And they need to come to invest in Africa. They need to collaborate with African business leaders, and more importantly, those like the Elumelu Foundation who like to support young African entrepreneurs. Let's see how we can work together to create a better future for everyone.
Tony, let's insist on this point. Yesterday, in my opening remarks, I said something which I'm a true believer, which is which, by the way, was inspired to me by President Clinton. I have to confess, you know, when President Clinton first inauguration, he said, there is nothing bad in the United States which could not be corrected by what is good in the United States. So I paraphrased President Clinton yesterday by saying something which I'm convinced there is nothing bad in our humanity which could not be stopped by what is good in our humanity. So let's ask you about Africa. What is good in Africa today? Because, you know, we need to be very frank here. Many people have a specific perception about Africa, especially in this part of the world. I have a long conversation with many friends who say, oh, you know, going to Africa is not always stable, it's complicated. You know, if you don't visit, it's like the perception that many people had a very wrong perception years ago about the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, you know. Unfortunately, when you don't travel a lot, you are always influenced by media, etc. So what is good in Africa which we should build on to definitely eradicate or minimize what is not doing well?
No, first is I'd like to share with our great audience here that Africa is a continent of 54 countries. It's not one country. Two is that Africa is a continent of 1.4 billion people and growing. So the characterization at times, you know, if in a country of 1.4 billion people, you have 1,000 bad people, that does not make the continent a bad continent. Just like other parts of the world, we have our challenges as well. Growing up, reading the Guinness Book of Records, it was stated then that crime occurs every 4 seconds in New York. Every 4 seconds in New York, someone is attacked. Okay, then that did not stop, and today does not stop people from wanting to go to New York or go to America. So at times, when we see or read out some of these things, we tend to over-dramatize about the negative things. Now, what is good about Africa? A lot. But to me, the most potent resource on the continent is our demography. Populous, young, energetic, intelligent, ambitious. It's a huge workforce for the world. And that is why I say, when I comment on digital divide, I say that digital divide must not lead to a societal divide. We need to develop everyone. Today in Africa, Nigeria in particular, we have massive immigration of people to Canada, to the UK. They support hospitals. They support IT sector in these countries. How about investing further collectively so that we can develop this workforce, so that this workforce becomes a positive force for the world and not a negative breathing space or ground for extremism. Another thing we have on the continent is huge natural resource endowment.